Welcome you to another exciting time in government class. I am Paul Okeke. We shall be looking at the rule of law under the theme Concepts and Principles of Government. And by the end of the lesson, you should be able to define the rule of law, discuss the three basic interpretations of the rule of law, and also explain the problems of maintaining the rule of law in practice. As the name implies, the rule of law, this has to do with everything that brings about order and peacefulness in a society. Laws are basically made or promulgated or enacted with the hope that they will be able to guide the interactions and relations among people in a society. And not just that, they are also made with the hope that people would also obey them. In other words, a law that is not obeyed is not a full law, because what gives it its potency is the fact that people obey the law. Let us look at the definition of the rule of law, and also would look at the three basic principles or interpretations of the rule of law. The rule of law, in its most simple and basic term, is the supremacy of the law over every member of the society and also over every institution in a society. In other words, the rule of law is a principle of law which states that every member of society, including every person's, institutions, groups, and also the government, are subject to the law. That is, the rule of law holds that no one is above the law in a given society. So it's not just that the law is binding on everybody. For example, the law of Ghana is not binding on someone who's in Nigeria. But if someone in Nigeria gets to move to Ghana, the laws of Ghana becomes binding on that person. So as much as the rule of law is the supremacy of the law over every member of a given society, it also distinguishes between those who a law is binding on and those which it is not binding on. The rule of law equally ensures that the laws that are made are clear for the purpose of them being obeyed. This is important because complicated or ambiguous laws, that is, laws that are not well stated and defined, cannot be obeyed by the people, because you can only obey instructions that you have fully understood. For the rule of law to be supreme in any given society, there is what you call the interpretations of the rule of law. The interpretations of the rule of law simply says that the rule of law deals with how a state is to be governed. In other words, there are three fundamental principles upon which the rule of law thrives on. These three principles are very important because they also help to convey the supremacy and legitimacy of the law over every member of the state. These principles include the principle of equality, the principle of impartiality, and the principle of individual rights. We shall now look at these principles one after the other. By the principle of equality, we mean that the law states that every individual should be treated equal, regardless of their status, religion, religious views, and also financial disposition. In other words, in a given society, the law states that no individual should be treated less because of what they do not possess or because of what they lack, because these are usually how a society comes about achieving order and peacefulness. When people are treated equally and fairly, there seems to be progress in a society. But when people are not treated equally based on some discriminatory grounds like how much they do not have or what they do not possess, it brings about disorder, because with time people will get to revolt such kinds of treatments. So the principle of equality is very important, because without it, the law cannot be said to have supremacy over every individual and institution in a state. The second principle is the principle of impartiality, which is also known as even-handedness. I would like to explain this by creating a scenario that you would understand. Take, for example, something goes on between you and a classmate, and your teacher calls the both of you but you know that this person was wrong. For some unknown reasons, she favors the classmate above you when it is clear that this person was actually the one who is wrong. And then you are wondering, why would this happen? There are some reasons why this may have happened. It may have been due to bias. In other words, she has a bias for someone who is from a certain place. So let's say, for example, you are Yoruba and your teacher does not like Yorubas. And for that reason, she favors the classmate above you. And also maybe for some prejudice, like she not liking that you are from a certain place or you practice a certain religion. Impartiality is close to equality because both of them state that people should be treated on fair grounds and not based on either bias or prejudice or from the fact that they do not have something that you perceive they should have. In other words, if someone has done a wrong, they should be punished because they did the wrong, not because they are from a certain place or they practice a certain religion for which another person who happens to come from your own place would not get punished for the same offense. So you see that the principle of impartiality states that if one person should be punished for an offense, then every other person should equally be punished for the same offense. That way, you are practicing what would help bring about a balance in society. Lastly, on the principles of the rule of law is the principle of individual rights. Every individual born into the world is born with certain fundamental natural rights which have been acknowledged by the world and also some international organizations. Some of these rights include rights to their own lives, rights to the freedom of association, and also rights to their own religious views. The principle of individual rights requires that the fundamental rights of people be respected at all times. In fact, it states that there is no negotiation upon which the rights of people can be violated. The rights of people should be upheld and respected by not just the government, fellow institutions in a society, and also the people in a society. This right also states that people have the fundamental right to seek redress when they feel that they have been treated unjustly, either by their government, by fellow citizens, or by any institution in the country. So, when these rights are not denied people, the rule of law can be said to be fully entrenched in a system and the supremacy of the law binding on every member of that system. It is the responsibility of governments, institutions, and equally individuals to ensure that these three principles are fully entrenched in every society where there are human beings and where people are being governed. Because without these fundamental and basic interpretations of the rule of law, there won't be anything like the rule of law in a society. Where there is an absence of the rule of law, so many human rights violations take place. For instance, the rights to religious freedom of people is taken away. The right to their own life is also taken away because in such state is almost anything goes and no one is made to be held responsible for their deeds and actions towards the people and the violations of their rights. We now want to look at how the rule of law can be maintained in practice. In other words, we're saying that some of the things we just said, like the basic interpretations of the rule of law, like the principle of equality, the principle of impartiality, and the principle of individual rights, may all be seen as being on paper. But let us look at how we can maintain the rule of law in practice because there is a general notion or belief that these things are not totally possible in everyday reality. Maintaining the rule of law in practice, like we have established more than once, is not just the duty of governments, but also the duty of every member of society. It is when people collectively work together that they can achieve the rule of law in practice. In other words, when people have a common goal to see that the rule of law reigns supreme in their society, that's when they can begin to practice the rule of law. A place or a society where there is no supremacy of the law, several problems would definitely surface, and they will come up time and time again, because one of the things that the rule of law helps to establish in society is accountability. Always remember that wherever there is no accountability, anything goes in such places, and it is not healthy for the people, neither is it healthy for the society in general. In other words, we are saying that it is the function of people to ensure the supremacy of the law over every member of a society. But then we are also aware that there are some reasons why this is not the case. Let us take Nigeria, for example. Do you think that the law reigns supreme in the affairs of not just governments, but also institutions and fellow citizens? Have you ever had a situation where you felt that something shouldn't have happened, but it happened, and then no one was made to be accountable for it? Perhaps you have one or two or three. These are the problems associated with maintaining the rule of law in practice. Now, there are also some reasons why this is the case. One of such reasons is due to the illiteracy of the people. By illiteracy, we mean that people are not informed or enlightened on what their rights are and on what the law says. When you have a society where there is a high level of illiteracy, it is almost impossible for the rule of law to be fully enacted in such societies. Why? Because it is only people who know their rights and who know what the law says that will be able to enforce the practices and principles of the rule of law. So, if you say, for instance, that Nigeria is a country where some people do certain things and get away with it, it is basically because the majority of the population do not know what their rights are, and also they do not know what the law says concerning certain things. So, illiteracy is one of the major reasons why the rule of law is not maintained in practice. Another reason why the rule of law is not maintained in practice is corruption. Now, corruption is defined as illegal dealings or activities. When the government, who is supposed to enforce and uphold the rule of law, is seen breaking the law, then there is a problem. It means that that society or country where this is the order of the day would most definitely not have the law reign supreme over the affairs of the people. This is so because many times in some nations, and Nigeria, for example, where people have also said that those who are meant to uphold the law are actually the ones who break it most of the time. For example, you have members or some members of the Nigeria police force who are said to collect bribe from commercial drivers and also people who they shouldn't be collecting bribes from. So when this happens, it gives people the impression that nothing would happen if they break a law. The most would be to perhaps bribe their way out of it. And when people see bribery as a way of escaping every problem, then there is a major concern in that particular society. A way to curb or mitigate this problem is that government has to become serious with punishing not just individuals who violate and break laws, but also government officials who most times are the ones who break these laws the most. When government does this, it sends a message to the people that it does not tolerate lawlessness, and it will help to enforce the supremacy of the law over the dealings and affairs of the people. So, high level of corruption in governments and also its institutions is one of the major reasons why the rule of law cannot be maintained in practice. Another problem with maintaining the rule of law is customs and traditions. By customs and traditions, we mean a people's way of life. In other words, their beliefs, their worldviews, their practices, their cultural beliefs, and everything encapsulates into what is known as customs and traditions. A people, for example, may not see the law as strong enough to be binding on some of the customs which they hold. A very good example is the general opinion by some cultures that a traditional ruler must not be charged to court. That is, whether they did wrong or not, or whether they violated a laid down law in a society, they cannot be charged to court. Hence, the popular pidgin phrase, Oba no dey go court. In other words, the king does not go to a court. Customs and traditions serve as a huge stumbling block to the practice of rule of law because they stand in the way of ensuring that those who violate laws are severely punished for it. Most times, when people who violate or go against certain laid down laws are not punished for such, it is because the beliefs of a particular people does not allow for them to be punished by certain laws, but within their own cultural system. And lastly, on some of the problems associated with maintaining the rule of law in practice is abuse of delegated authority. By abuse of delegated authority, we mean that there are some public office holders who have been entrusted with discretional powers to be able to make laws and also act on behalf of the people. Now, these people are seen to act with impunity. That is, they act sometimes with the knowledge and impression that nothing will be done to them because they are the law. But an individual is not the law, neither are a people the law. The law is the law and it is binding on every individual, whether a political office holder, whether you are the richest person in the society, or whether you are from one influential family or another. The law is binding on every member of society, and being a person in position of power or who has been entrusted with political power does not confer on you the right to violate the laws and go unpunished. So there you have it. We have looked at some of the problems associated with maintaining the rule of law in practice. Now, these problems are some of the reasons a country is referred and termed as lawless, because the problem with such nations is that people are usually not informed about what the law says, is that they place their customs and traditions above the laws of the land, and also they have people who have been entrusted with political power who use it for selfish interest rather than interest of the general public. We have come to the end of this lesson, but just before we go, let us take a quick recap of all that we have done so far in the course of our lesson. We started by saying that the rule of law is a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated. In other words, we said that the rule of law means the supremacy of the law over every member of the society. Then we also looked at three basic interpretations of the rule of law, and we said that the principle of equality, the principle of impartiality, and lastly, the principle of individual rights are the three basic and fundamental interpretations of the rule of law. And lastly, we said that some of the problems attached with the practice of the rule of law includes illiteracy of the people, high level of corruption, abuse of delegated legislature, and customs and traditions. Let us now take some of these questions to test our knowledge on what we've learned so far. Question 1. One of these is not a basic interpretation of the rule of law. Option A, the principle of equality. Option B, the principle of impartiality. Option C, the principle of legislation. Or option D, the principle of individual rights. The correct answer to that question is option C. The principle of legislation is not an interpretation of the rule of law. Question 2. The following are the problems encountered with the practice of the rule of law except option A, high literacy level, option B, high level of corruption, option C, customs and traditions, or option D, delegated legislation. The correct answer to that question is option A, high literacy level. I hope you are now able to convincingly explain what the rule of law means if you are asked to do so. Until I come your way in our next lesson, always remember to study your books. Always remember to be safe. And bye bye.